Yes. Hello, everyone. This is Gokhan. I'm a managing director at IOSG Ventures. We are an Asia-based Web3 native capital, venture capital investing in the space since 2017. And we're going to be talking about the modular stack of the blockchains today. Let's maybe take a round of introductions. Would you like to start, Flip?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Forte. I'm one of the founders of Elixir. Real quick on my background, so I got into crypto back in 2016 when I started the Carnegie Mellon Blockchain Group. I was the president there until I graduated from CMU. I started a company called Block Venture, built that up. We had 41 different research groups and 44 venture funds in the space. Ran that for about 2 years. We were advisors to Solana, Moonbeam, Flow Network, like working with these guys over a multi-year long time horizon, earning team tokens, all of that. And sold that to go all in on Elixir about 2.5 years ago. So yeah, it's a pleasure to meet all of you, and looking forward to this panel.
Hey everyone, my name is Hilmar. I'm one of the founders of Gelato. Gelato is Web3's cloud platform, and what we do is we help projects launch their own rollups, L2s, L3s, using the Arbitrum Orbit, OP Stack, Polygon CDK. We enrich these rollups with a bunch of Web3 middleware services such as smart contract automation, verifiable randomness, gasless transactions, and some more. And happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Anuray. I'm co-founder of Avail. Previously, I founded Polygon. Avail is actually a product that was started within Polygon, but became a separate project last year. It focuses primarily on providing data availability to scaling rollups, and we also build a rollup interoperability layer on top using proof aggregation.
Amazing, yeah. Maybe we could take some time to just focus on and elaborate on the specifics of your projects. And I'll start with Hilmar, actually. So Hilmar, you're basically building this like a roll-up as a service, which is gonna, a lot of this modular stack is basically the future of the scaling of blockchains, hopefully. And we know that there are so many different stacks that the dev developers have to manage if they're building something on it. And this is not easy, right? Like to navigate all this modular stack. And now you're coming in and trying to make this easier for the projects. Could you elaborate, like what sort of problems do you see the dev developers, roll-up developers are facing, and how you're trying to solve these problems?
Yeah, I think a very basic problem, first of all, is there are so many options and technologies out there that it's very difficult for them to understand what is actually important for their specific use case. Do they require zero-knowledge proofs for faster finality? Are optimistic rollups sufficient? What about block times? How long should they be? Do they need custom gas tokens and so on? So I think that what sort of data availability layer to choose, right? What are the different trade-offs there? I think there are so many technical details that it's just nice to have like a platform that abstracts that for you. And we actually on our platform have different packages. We have like a gaming package, we have a DeFi package, we have a perpetual DEX package, right? That we sort of select and compose, and they are actually sort of perfectly suited for certain use cases. And what we really focus on at Gelato is what actually, like having your own blockchain shouldn't just be, okay, you do exactly the same things that you did before on like, I don't know, Arbitrum 1 or Polygon, right, the public chains. You should actually leverage having your own chain to create a much better user experience. And for example, there's a really cool app chain launching on Gelato very soon called Raya. They're using the Arbitrum Orbit stack, and they really leverage having their own blockchain to the fullest. They have 250 millisecond block times. Users actually don't transact with the blockchain directly. They all go through our Gelato relay system, meaning they don't have to pay any gas on that chain. All of the transactions that are not user-specific are just like automated transactions that pull in data from off-chain from like price oracles and then settle trades directly. So users don't interact with the chain directly. It's all sort of via these middleware services. And the cool thing is, and that's why we went into like rollups in the first place is we build like these systems that connect smart contracts to off-chain data. We build systems that make transactions gasless on behalf of users, and we actually merge them with the sequencer. So now the sequencer basically builds blocks with off-chain data pulled right into them with user intents or operations baked into the protocol. And this is actually like the power of what we can do with our services with rollup technology. And yeah, this just provides a system that you can't achieve on like a public chain, because you are now the sequencer can do much more than, you're the block builder, and the block builder can do much more what it can do on like a public chain. And yeah, that's why we are very excited about it.
Amazing, thanks a lot. And Anuray, you guys are building like the most, basically like the key pieces of this modular framework, and Ethereum, although they're trying to solve the same problem, is notoriously expensive. Despite some of the improvements in the cost of posting data on Ethereum, it's going down, but it's nowhere close to where people want it to be. And the estimations show that the next 3 to 5 years are going to be like that. So how do you come into this current condition? Like, how does Avail position itself, and how does it differentiate itself from the other solution providers in the space?
Yeah. So, like Ethereum pivoted to the rollup-centric roadmap back in 2020, and that's when they explicitly decided to become or focus on data availability, because that's the key to scaling rollups. And data availability sampling is a technology that is required to implement this, and that's what we've been doing at Avail. Is we've spent the last 3.5 years building out the data availability sampling piece. But data availability itself is not sufficient, right? Like, I mean, I think if you look at the landscape, so there's now an influx of data availability players. And so I think data availability is going to be a very commoditized space. We are going to eventually scale a lot of rollups, but like if you kind of think of the architectural choices that we have taken in kind of the Ethereum or the rollup landscape is, so there is this monolithic thesis of, can you make your single chain as fat as fast as possible? And then there's the whole rollup centric piece where we have one base layer and there's hundreds and thousands of rollups or services on top, right? I like to think of these as microservices that branch of the main layer. And you also need to kind of provide interconnectedness to this entire system. Like you already have like things like Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, zk Sync, Starkwares, Tycho, Scroll, and like 20 different rollup stacks. And even today you can think of users having to switch chain RPCs, users having to bridge from one chain to the another. Right? This is going to be a massive rollup fragmentation and a user experience problem. And so how do we kind of abstract a lot of this from the user? So it's important to build those interoperability or composability rails, and that's also what we do at Avail Nexus, which uses this combination of proof aggregation and data availability sampling. So essentially what we are saying is, what we bring to the table is, like Ethereum of course has the data availability sampling roadmap. If you see the Avail DA implementation, it's actually uses the same primitives as that is what is going to be used in the final dank sharding roadmap. And it's a very useful implementation to kind of reference against. And also rollups really can't be waiting around for scalable DA and the interoperability on top, right? Like, so that's what we are really kind of focused on, providing so scalability as well as sort of a rollup abstraction experience on top.
Great, thanks. And Flip, I want to now, like, maybe let's bring it to the liquidity layer, which is basically the life and blood of any of the new networks that are launching. And notoriously, again, the roll-up or modular frameworks, they usually lead to some sort of fragmentation in liquidity. And you're building this liquidity network that potentially powers the whole modular stack. So what does it mean for the new network builders, new dApps, new DEXs that are launching? How does Elixir come into place and integrate with them?
Yeah, so really high level, order books face this fundamental problem where they don't have any sort of infrastructure to trustlessly bootstrap liquidity to their books, right? If you are an order book based exchange, you have to go through one of the big 4 or 5 market makers to attract liquidity on your pairs. Like, there is no way for a retail user to come in and just one-click supply, right? So what Elixir is building, right, Elixir is a DPoS, like modular blockchain built to power order book liquidity. And so we have over 30 exchanges that are building out like native features of their exchange that they're offering to their end users powered by Elixir. And so what we've seen is that like I don't know if you guys have heard of like Orderly, or there's like all these other like perp dexes. These like Vertex, for example, just launched Vertex Edge. Is that not only is there like this fundamental issue that Elixir is helping solve, but there's the liquidity, like you were saying, is fragmented across so many different ecosystems that like you have some funds that are on Blast, you have some that are on like ETH, some that are on like AVAX or like whatever, right? You have all these different funds that are on all these different chains. And so what we're seeing is that all these different dexes are going from chain to chain, and then they're creating like this off-chain order matching to kind of aggregate that liquidity. And so we've been seeing a lot of this especially with these like AMMs too. A lot of these like leading AMMs that you guys are all familiar with are actually launching like order books or launching perpetuals. I mean, obviously from the exchange perspective, they can monetize a hell of a lot better with a perps exchange, because people can just, you could deposit $100 and then turn up the leverage and you're trading with $1,000 or $5,000, right? So from the exchange fees are a lot more lucrative that way, and you can also charge on open interest. So just on versus like spot, you're able to earn, like volume is a lot higher, so trade fees are a lot higher, and you get like these degens that will just come in and like supply $1 million worth of Bitcoin and then go, I want to buy more Bitcoin, right? And turn up the leverage slider and then buy like another $5 million worth of Bitcoin exposure, right? So yeah, really the main issue with fragmentation, Elixir is actually trying to solve this as well. We just launched a cross-chain LP token that will actually, you mint it with Ethereum, it's redeemable 1-for-1 with Ethereum, and it actually backstops liquidity on all of the different top dexes that are integrating Elixir, right? So you mint this token, will route liquidity to Hyperliquid, DYDX, like Vertex, RabbitX, Bluefin, and so these guys, Vertex, RabbitX, and Bluefin, Elixir is already live there. We power roughly 40 to 60% of the order book liquidity on each of those exchanges. So like with Bluefin, I think we're at like 80%. So if you open a trade on Bluefin, like your counterparty is like most likely us. And then essentially what we're doing is with this cross-chain token, we can actually route liquidity to where it's needed. So the last thing I'll mention, because I know I've been going on for a bit, once Elixir comes to the picture, you then have these really like interesting use cases unlocked, right? So for example, DYDX's long-term vision is that they want to have 1,000 or 5,000 markets or 10,000 markets, right? Similar to like Uniswap. The issue there is that for every new market that they have to add right now, they have to go to Wintermute and say, hey, please support this market, right? And then if Wintermute says, oh, I don't really know, I can't arbit to Binance, like, no, sorry, then they can't add it, right? Like, you need a party that's there. So now what can happen is you can go to DYDX in the next month or so, and you can create any new market, and you can supply liquidity to that market and earn a share of the taker fees that are generated by that market. On the back end, Elixir is powering that. So we layer the liquidity on the books. Our protocol, we have 14,000 validators. We're updating once a second, right? You can earn a share of those taker fees, right? So our protocol then, as more taker fees are starting to happen on that one market, right? Say that Ansem tweets about some coin, it starts ripping, everyone's trading on it, right? There's a lot of trader fees. The APYs go up on that market, and Elixir can route liquidity there proactively. And then what you have is activity ticks up on a market. Then you start to see the books getting deeper as Elixir is routing liquidity to provide liquidity on that pair, and the LPs are earning a higher APY. So there's all these really interesting use cases that Elixir unlocks, but hopefully that kind of addressed. I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but yeah, a lot on that.
All right, thank you. So maybe the next question is going to be a little bit more general, but I think one of the main critiques to our industry is that like we've been building this, trying to build this infrastructure for so many years now. And then with the introduction of the modular stack, now we have data availability layers, we have roll-up technology providers, we have liquidity networks, etc. So people, rightfully so, are asking for like, is this going to go on like this? Like, why does it too long to build this infrastructure layer? So I'd love to get your opinions on like why this is the case. You think still we're in the infrastructure phase, or how do we break through this? Maybe we can start with Anuray.
Yeah, it's a valid question to ask, right? Like, but see, sometimes we kind of forget why we are all building all this stuff for, right? Like, why are blockchains important in the first place? And like, if you kind of look at the history, so of course, Ethereum was built 10 years ago, and there's been sufficient amount of time. But if you kind of look at how the architecture has evolved, right? It was a very monolithic sort of architecture that has happened. And it's only in 2020 is when we went into a more roll-up way of doing things or a more modular way of doing things. And there's a slightly underappreciated nuance to this topic that what roll-ups really bring to the table is the ability to spin up new chains, new sort of execution environments, so new sort of authentication mechanisms at very low cost. Before roll-ups got invented, the cost of spinning up a new chain was huge. Like you had to bootstrap a new validator set, you had to bootstrap a new token, you had to make that token valuable, you need to have a community. So the cost of bootstrapping that chain was pretty huge. And once you kind of get locked down to it, the execution mechanism and such, right? Like it's very difficult to pivot, right? Like if you look at any monolithic blockchain. And the main difference that rollups have made is now rollups are not only EVM rollups. They can be WASM rollups, Cairo rollups, TypeScript rollups, Rust rollups written in Rust, for example, rollups that have no gas metering, rollups that can be accessed by API access tokens, for example, and so on, right? Like I mean, we've just started brushing the design space of like the actually not only the execution engine but the data model, and I mean you can now today build a rollup that's written in Rust or in TypeScript and have a custom data model. Like a lot of like if you kind of look at the developers in the space, it's actually in the grand scheme of things it's only a handful. And so one of the real, I mean there's of course a lot of other reasons to this, but one of the things that I feel genuinely is if we can make writing apps as simple as like the same ease in which kind of we can take the developer writing a smart contract and have them write a TypeScript rollup, for example, or a Rust rollup, for example, and then make it easy to write it in their mental model, not write a program, take a data model, put it into whatever data model the blockchain supports, but do it in the way that they think. And I think developer friction is very, very important to solve for, because I like to give this example of mobile apps, right? Like the first mobile apps that were built were not rather meaningful. But if you kind of look at the timeline with which Uber or an Instagram came, right? Like it came after a lot of developer iteration over the years. And like it's not on day one that someone thinks that, oh, can I use the GPS functionality on my mobile phone to kind of apply it to the passenger driver matching problem, right? Like and Uber takes time to create. It comes after a lot of iteration, and blockchains are new trust infra, right? Like, and we are still kind of lot of developers still need to go through that process, crowdsource that creativity and get to that process. And so I think we are certainly at an inflection point with rollups. I think we will get there, right? Like I mean that's the feeling that we have, and that's why our main focus is at Avail.
Cool.
Yeah, I think these things just take time, right? Like the internet, when it was created, like one of the first killer use cases that really took off then was like e-commerce, Amazon, right? You can like buy things online and ship it to your home. And why did that take off rather quickly? Well, because you already had invested hundreds of years of building like logistics networks that can actually like ship parcels from one place to another relatively quickly, right? And then they just build like this internet layer on top, and then payments had to be solved, right? And then this stuff kind of like worked out of the box very well. What we are doing here, we are trying to rebuild like the financial system especially, and like this decentralized asset layer where you can transfer ownership of digital goods to different parties. And first of all, we need to interconnect this with the traditional financial world. This is very complicated, very difficult. Regulatory has to be solved, right? And then also the incentives for the legacy system might not be there, so we have to kind of like do it ourselves. And then one problem I always saw is that we actually mixed this decentralized asset layer, this trustless computation layer that we built with a new paradigm, which is self-custody. And self-custody is just such a huge new paradigm that, hey, users can take fully, they have their own ownership over assets suddenly. And I think this also delayed adoption in general in crypto because it's so difficult, right? Like the UX sucks. And if we would have all started with just, hey, there's like a custodian that manages everything for us, then potentially many more users already in the world would have sort of get on boarded and use these technologies today. But obviously self-custody is something super important. We need to push it, but it's a process that is very cumbersome and takes a lot of tools to actually get right over time. So we try to sort of mix two things at once and bring it to the world. And I think now with like wallet as a service and these kind of solutions, we are trying to sort of decouple them more from one another and try to solve each at a time, which I'm bullish on. And yeah, to the infrastructure, unfortunately, infrastructure still doesn't scale to the masses, right? We're still very early on. Every roll-up that we have today, every framework, like, I don't know, like with Arbitrum Orbit on Gelato, right? We can do 300, max 600. The ZK rollups even less. So that's still not enough, right? So we are already at Gelato looking into how can we sort of run 5 different rollups in parallel for an application and interconnect them with like sequencing, and then sort of have like in World of Warcraft where you have like 5 servers where different users are on and like shard the execution even further. Then you have parallel EVMs that come out, right? So there's still a lot of work that has to be put into the infrastructure, unfortunately, to make it work. But there are a lot of very smart teams working on this, so I'm sure in the next couple of years we have it. And then once really this application comes that requires this sort of scalability, I think hopefully we are ready.
Yeah, I think not too much else to add. I think that's a good point, actually. I think generally, when you think about like the most successful use cases of crypto, it's been around anything that touches speculation has done really well, right? Exchanges make money. The wallets make a lot of money. If you're a staking provider, you make a lot of money. If you're a market maker, you make a lot of money, right? But everything else is kind of almost an afterthought, right? Like you saw that FTX would go and sponsor arenas and blow money on everything, right? But then like developers are just like, once you get actually into the web, like into Web3, like you essentially get this fragmentation where you have all these different variety of use cases where there's some people that need super high throughput chains, and then some are more of like, oh, well, we just need like basic like lending, borrowing, right? And so you have this huge array of like these different like needs that these DeFi apps have, and you add the UX issues on top, and you add all these other issues, and so it just takes time to get to the point where where the tech can actually catch up. You've seen that obviously, like exchanges, like in the earlier point, right? Like there's no issues with any of those, right? Like that is fully developed. They have a great reach everywhere. You go into New York, like I live in New York. You go to the subways. There's ads for like all these different products and exchanges and everything, right? Like that is really developed. But then see the actual tech is like all the way back, and that's because there's all of these diverse array of problems that you run into when you have things that are like brand new, like you'd mentioned, like self-custody and things that have never really been tried before. So it's just one of those things, if you're reinventing the new financial system, it's going to take time. And I think that like a lot of the guys here, especially on the stage, are building great tech to actually solve and unblock a lot of the builders. So yeah, I think it's quite bullish on Web3's future.
Perfect. One another thing that I'd like to get your opinions on is, right now, if you look at it, I think there are different ways this like whole modular thing is playing out. On the one hand, you have the general purpose L2s like Arbitrums, like Optimism coming in. On the other hand, you have some clusters also started to show up. Like you have the base, and there are now L3s building base on top of base, and that is also positioning itself as like a social layer for general like Ethereum ecosystem, right? There might be different, like Ronin is trying to become the gaming ecosystem and gaming cluster. So between these, I think like general purpose layers versus the dApp layers or roll-up layers or clusters, do you have any preference, or how do you see this is going to play out in the next 5 to 10 years? Or how do you position yourself for that sort of a future? Or maybe you're just agnostic to whatever the future might play out. We can start with you this time.
Okay. Yeah. So I actually think we had a good conversation before the panel around like Bitcoin layer 2s. I think that's actually something that's pretty innovative, right? There's all of this like Bitcoin capital that's been essentially just like in people's cold wallets, and now that they can onboard that to a layer 2 and begin actually like interacting with DeFi apps, right, through an EVM compatible chain. I think that's actually really interesting, and I hadn't really looked too much into it before you'd flag that. What I think will happen, I mean, I think the Pareto principle is real, and I think in crypto it is no different, right? Like wherever there's going to be one or two, I think really big winners, and then the rest kind of fade into irrelevance, right? Like I don't think anyone here actively uses like EOS or any of the old like 2017 like really hot chains, right? Like it's kind of like everyone has kind of moved back to like Ethereum or some of these other big ones, right? And so I think there will be a few winners that will win in certain categories. And I think that's the case in like everything. Like it's almost everything in life too. It's like you have like, there's 20%, the top 20% have 80% of all of the adoption, right? And I think that's going to be the exact same thing in Web3. I don't think it'll be any different. I believe I do think that there will be, like the future will be modular. So there can be multiple winners in, like, for example, there can be a winner in data availability, right? There can be a winner in, like for us, like liquidity, right? For these different order book-based exchanges. So there can be winners across different categories, but I think there will be a Pareto principle, and I don't think that like people are going to be bridging onto like 20, like in the future, it's not going to just keep growing. There's not going to be like 500 different chains personally, I don't think, where like just for like broad-based general availability smart contracts. But I do think there will be specialized chains, right? Like for example, like obviously I talk a lot about trading because it's like Elixir is like, it's what I know the best. Like DYDX created DYDX v4 chain, and that is like a purpose-built blockchain. And I think things like that will stay. But like, yeah, once again, just like I don't think like people will be deploying general smart contracts on like 150 chains in the future, right? Like I think they will tend to gravitate to where the best documentation is, where the developers are, where most of the infrastructure is built out, right? Like if users don't have wallets or have to download a new MetaMask, like they have to add a new extension, like they're not going to want to do that. So those are my thoughts for the future.
Yeah, so in general, when we talk about general purpose versus more app-specific chains, I think there's a clear trend that more and more app chains are coming out, and the trend is usually you start on a general purpose chain, and then at some point you mature to your own application-specific chain, because having access to the sequencer or having access to building blocks just provides you with superpowers, right? And what we do at Gelato is we actually help projects leverage these superpowers of being able to build your own blocks by letting them access off-chain data when they build the blocks, right? By customizing the UX when building blocks. And DYDX does this, right? They feed in Oracle data by building blocks, and more applications like this will come out. And so we believe that all the big applications will always go to their own app chain. Why would they pay rent to like a general purpose chain in the first place, right? If they drive all the volumes, if they drive all the sequencing revenues, why do you pay rent to a middleman that is just a middleman to a data availability layer and a settlement layer, right? It doesn't really make much sense. Only if you have atomic composability on this L2 or something that you might be built on, then it might make sense. But even now with things like shared sequencing and so on, we want to come to an atomic inclusion of transactions between different chains, not atomic execution for now, but like we are getting to a more interoperable world over the long term anyways. So I think this is a clear trend that we are seeing, and yeah, I believe every application and every company will have their own blockchain, and they will all be the difference between now every company has their own server and some APIs. It's just not open, right? It's closed, and sometimes you can communicate it if they give you an API key. But in the future, in the Web3 world, everyone has their own blockchain, their own database, on their own kind of like API, but it's sort of open by default. And some maybe want to put some permissions on top, right? But in general, they all follow standard interfaces, and assets can freely move between these interfaces everywhere. And this is kind of like this asset protocol that we built. They can just move from one server to another, and they are all like what we call today roll-ups. I'm not sure if we will call them roll-ups or L2s. At some point, they will probably just call, I don't know, decentralized database, I don't know. But yeah, this is how we sort of see this world. And like we're already spinning up enterprise. Like we have like US enterprises that now have their own L2s that do exactly that are live with us. So like it's already starting, and it will take some time, but yeah, this is how we see the future.
Yeah, see, we are at that stage where we kind of started with, let's say, like 1 roll-up, 2 roll-up, 5 roll-ups, right? Like, I mean, so it was a very chain brand-led marketing or awareness that we go through. So someone thinks of using a blockchain, oh, I'm going to use an Arbitrum or an Optimism or a Polygon. And really, like, I think it's the incorrect mindset, frame of mind, right? Like, it's basically apps are the main thing, right? Like, you don't talk about, like, AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, right? Like, you talk about the apps on the front, right? Like, you talk about Facebook and Uber and Instagram, right? Like, not about the underlying infra. So today, it might be the case that an Arbitrum 1 is more popular or a Base is more popular because there's no shared notion of, like validity and interoperability and so on, right? Like, I mean, and things have changed massively over the last 3-4 years, right? Like you have now, like shared security layers, like data availability layers are shared security layers, right? If you build a roll-up on top of something like Avail, it's basically inherits the entire security of the base layer, similar to Ethereum, for example. And so essentially, we've just in the transition from a very chain brand perspective to being more of an app brand perspective. And the way the roll-up stacks are maturing, and especially with the advent of like much faster ZK proving systems, right? Like with ZK rollups, right? Not only are these EVM rollups, as I said, right? Like these are more app-specific rollups, right? Like, and like if you look at the analogy on the internet, apps on the internet do not run on one big supercomputer, right? Like they run on independent servers and they scale independently based on demand, based on growth, and essentially, like the major difference between what happens on the internet and what happens in blockchain land is that you need to have some shared notions of trust, because you don't know what trust assumptions that you're dealing with when you're crossing different boundaries, blockchain boundaries, right? Like, and so I think part of what we are building in infrastructure land right now, especially on the roll-up infrastructure side, is how can we, of course, enable a lot of roll-ups, but how can we have this shared notions of validity, shared notions of composability, and this can be through shared sequencing, proof aggregation. Anyways, I mean, I'm not getting into the entire detail, but what I'm trying to say is we are going to move from a world of chains to a world of apps, and these apps might like live on one chain, but they will be able to access users, access liquidity on other chains seamlessly, because then you will have some shared notions of connecting different, like chains, for example. And I think the question really is not, like how many chains will be there. The question is, how many apps will be there. How will apps be able to interact with other apps if they need to? For example, I don't think everything needs to be synchronous, really. Like if you need synchronicity, you do it on something like an SVM rollup or whatever. But I like this example of asynchronous microservices, right? Like if you look at a service like Amazon, it's not only Amazon's internal microservices. It also there's like a connection to Visa, connection to Stripe, for example, and so it's a complex set of microservices working in the backend, but the user doesn't feel any of it, right? Like, and so the app functionality is what important, and it's the job of our infrastructure builders to abstract a lot of this and make it easy for developers to build these apps and users to use these apps. That's how I feel about it.
Amazing, yeah. Thanks a lot for the insights. Maybe to conclude, everybody can take a minute to just give the exciting milestones that are upcoming, or how people can get in touch with your project. Anurag, we can start with you.
Yeah. So we've been in development since 3.5 years, and the first roadmap, part of the roadmap that we are excited for, which is the Avail DM mainnet, that is out in a few weeks. So that is coming pretty soon. And like the other parts where we do a prototype of the composability part using proof aggregation. So that we are releasing a POC pretty soon on between Polygon ZK EVM and ZK Sync. So you can test composability out between these two ecosystems, perhaps sometime in early Q3. So that's what we are kind of looking for the.
Yeah, so if you are interested in building a really scalable application that requires their own rollup, for example, using Avail as a data availability layer or whatever you sort of think is best for you, definitely come speak with us. We're doing a lot of really cool, innovative experiments, such as running multiple chains in parallel and like abstracting them away and then having them feel as one to really scale to tens of thousands of transactions per second. So yeah, if you're interested in that, definitely come talk to us at Gelato.
Yeah, on our end, we just launched our Apothecary, which is essentially our version of a points program. We're going to be distributing, or we are distributing 20 million potions to people who are participating in our network, running validators, having liquidity supplied, things of that sort. We launch our mainnet in August, so we closed our Series B. We raised 8 at 800, and we're ramping up to our mainnet launch. So yeah, definitely, if you have any questions, you can go to the website or talk to me after. Our website's elixir.xyz. And then the next few native integrations, Apex is launching their Apex FAMM, and then we have Orderly launching their quantum pools to their users. Followed by like DYDX and Hyperliquid. So yeah, feel free to reach out, get involved, join our community, and yeah, hope to see you all in the Discord.
All right, yeah. Thanks a lot to all our panelists for the insights, and thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you.
I think we'll have to take a picture.